3 reasons why sex offenders were created. Let's get into it. Hey, how are you? And welcome back to another episode of The Modern Day Leper. I'm Ahmad Blakemore, the Modern Day Leper. 3 ways sex offenders were created. And you say, what? Sex offenders created? Of course, they were created. So we know that the word sex offender or the phrase sex offender is not really a legal term. It's more of a political term. So you have to ask yourself, who benefits when you create sex offenders? Well, who invented the phrase? Politicians invented the phrase. Politicians love sex offenders. Why? Because sex offenders benefit them when it's time for them to get elected. What do? They say, we're going to get tough on crime. We're going to protect your families and protect your children. We're going to do this and that. So who do they go after? Well, they can't go after the middle class. Everybody loves the middle class. The middle class is the reason America moves. So you have to go after the marginalized people. You have to go after the people that's on drugs. You have to go after the convicts, people who you think are less than. And who fits the bill better than sex offenders? Sex offenders are there when politicians need them. Politicians benefit from sex offenders. They can come up with all kinds of ways to get tough on crime when they need it. Who else benefits from sex offenders? Who else helped to create sex offenders? Well, of course, if it's a political term, politicians and law enforcement go hand in hand. So when you start creating more laws, who has to enforce these laws? City and county governments. So number 2 is the city and county governments who benefit from sex offenders. How do they benefit from sex offenders? Well, let's say you're on probation and you pay $30 or $40 a month to be on probation, but you're off probation now. You're off parole now. So you don't have to pay. But, sex offenders can be exploited. Why? Because they have to register. And when they register, they have to pay. Every month they have to pay. I'm sorry, depending on where you live, in my state is quarterly. So we will register 4 times a year, $20 per time. So that's $80 a year. So if I register every year at $80 for the next 20 years, imagine how much money they get from just one person. If you've got tens of thousands of sex offenders across the United States, imagine how much money these local entities get, these cities and these counties. Besides, when they want to enforce more laws or scare the general public, what do? They say, this guy's a sex offender. And people get wild. Law enforcement is the reason sex offenders are created, so that they can exploit them for money, even though there is no reason to pay. I have to pay $80 a year for absolutely nothing. Who else benefits from sex offenders? Well, number 3 is social control. It's just the general public. I don't know if you've ever had to or ever been in a situation where you've seen the general public react when somebody says, that guy right there is a child molester. This guy over here is a sex offender. That guy could lose his life. Why? Because the general public, he's after your children. No, they're not after your children. But in the minds of the general public, Sex offenders are the worst of the worst because they're constantly thinking the worst about them. If you really knew the truth, sex offenders really don't want to be noticed. They don't even want people to know they're sex offenders. They're running, trying to get away from the mob, which is the general public who has all of these negative ideas about them. Who benefits when sex offenders are created? The politicians who have created them with all of these antiquated laws that they come up with in order to get elected. The police officers in these local and county municipalities who get to charge them money for no reason at all for registration. In most cases, if you haven't changed your address or job, there's nothing new to fill out. They can actually make a Xerox copy of the first form and put it in the file. But they want the money. And since the general public allows it, we can be exploited. Why? Because there is no one to stand up for us to stop it. And as soon as somebody decides that they're going to help us out and stand up, it will be stopped. But that's not the case, which is why I'm here. Because I'm here to speak to the general public. Because you are the key to everything, the general public. Politicians and law enforcement use you for everything that they want to do. They use you and they play on your fears and they ask you to be afraid so that they can exploit people, so that politicians can go to Washington or whatever state they're in, go to the Capitol. Stop being afraid. Start thinking. How many of you in the general public actually know a sex offender, have actually talked to one, to see that they're people too, what they actually think? Or do you just have the mob mentality? There's a sex offender. Oh my God, here we go. It's a question. We really, as people, need to understand how we treat each other. It's important. We can't let a handful of politicians destroy who we are as people, who we are as Christians, our love and empathy for one another. We've all made mistakes. We've all done things wrong. Some of us worse than others, but the majority of us who come out of prison have done our time, changed our lives, and continue to try to go forward. It's easier to reach down than it is to punch down. Yes, sex offenders are created. Listen, let me just add this one thing, and this is from my heart. Laws that politicians and law enforcement come up with, or I should say the lawmakers, the politicians, the law enforcement segment has to enforce the laws that the politicians come up with. But let me say this. No matter how many laws you come up with, more laws will not replace bad parenting. If you want your children safe, be a parent. If you want your children safe, be aware. If you want your children safe, be involved. Be on post. Make sure you know where your children are at all times. Make sure that you're holding your children accountable for letting you know where they are. Make a phone call. Deal with responsible people in the process of your parenting. That way, politicians aren't using you to overreact when they need a reaction. Sex offenders are created. Why? How do I know? Because before that term was ever invented by a politician, there were already laws on the books for rapists, pedophiles, statutory rape, sodomy. There were already laws on the books covering that. Why do we need extra laws? We don't. And so I say, please stop allowing our politicians to come up with crazy, antiquated laws that our law enforcement people have to enforce and take advantage of marginalized people. And for the love of God, to the general public, please open your minds and your hearts. Use your Christianity. Take care of your children. Be aware. And stop letting people use you. My name is Ahmad Blakemore. I'm the modern day leper, and I appreciate you listening to me. Please support the channel, like and subscribe. I've got videos coming every week, if not twice a week. Support the channel. Let's get this information out here. We all know somebody who is a sex offender, who's coming out of prison, who need help, who need love, who needs that Christian team. Thank you, and I appreciate you listening. Have a great one.